Thank you for joining and welcome to Lead Dev Bookmarked. Lead Dev is a global community of engineering leaders who come together to discuss all things leadership, teams, tool, and tech. Bookmarked is our monthly book club, and this is our 10th event. This edition of Lead Dev Bookmark is sponsored by Work & Co. Thank you to them for helping us put this together. I'm Susan Bond, and I'll be your moderator for this discussion. I'm a former COO of a scaling startup and an executive coach. My specialty is tech leaders. You can find me on Twitter at Susan Bond. Today, we'll be talking about Inspired and his next book, Empowered, with Marty Cagan. Before founding the Silicon Valley Product Group to pursue his interests in helping others create successful products through his writing, speaking, advising, and coaching, Marty served as an executive responsible for defining and building products for some of the most successful companies in the world, including Hewlett-Packard, Netscape Communications, and eBay. Yeah, that's a good list. Marty was most recently Senior Vice President of Product and Design for eBay, where he was responsible for designing products and services for the company's global e-commerce trading site. During his career, Marty has personally performed and managed most of the roles of a modern software product organization, including product management, software development, product marketing, user experience design, software testing, engineering management, and general management. That's a list. Yep, that sure is. Welcome to the Bookmarked.
Thanks very much.
So you just had a book published called Empowered, but before we talk about that, let's just backtrack a little bit and talk about your first book, Inspired. What was the impetus for Inspired? Where did that come from?
Well, Inspired is the book I wanted to write for a long time because basically my favorite topic is really how do product teams solve hard problems in ways that customers love but work for the business. That's kind of the essence. And you talk to any great engineer or designer, product manager, that's really why they're doing what they're doing. And I had been lucky enough to work with many of the really great companies and teams, early Google, early Amazon, later Facebook, Twitter, all these different groups. And I saw that the way they solved those problems was often so different than the way most companies did. And after I finished eBay, I wanted to share more of what I learned. A lot of those techniques, by the way, really emerged and in the Netscape era. Netscape was really the original internet company, and so much changed. Really, before Netscape, the sort of major way we built products was really the Microsoft way. That's what I was taught, and it's not bad necessarily, but it changed pretty dramatically with the internet. And I think things did get a lot better, but there was very little written about it. If some of your engineering managers will remember, there was a series that was quite famous from Microsoft books on how engineering teams worked. That's what I learned, really. I was at HP Labs, which was one of the better places, but still we followed the Microsoft way of building. And anyway, that really did change. And there was very little written about that. So I wanted to share the techniques of how product managers, designers, engineers work together to solve these problems. And so that was the motivation for Inspired. I actually wrote the first edition of Inspired about 13 years ago. And remarkably, that lasted about 10 years. And then I was trying to write just a second edition, which turned into 100% rewrite because so much had changed over the 10 years, like Agile, for example, like Lean Startup. And I had written about those things coming in the first edition, but now they were already there for most teams for many years. So I wrote a new edition of Inspired. And that's the one that came out 3 years ago. That's the one that is really spread pretty far, because honestly, when I wrote the first edition, there weren't that many teams really doing product work, but that certainly changed in the last 10 years. And so, that was the purpose, though, and it's still my favorite topic. Actually, is that.
That's so great. And how would you describe, you've got empowered. How would you describe like who inspired is for? Like who were you really writing to? What was the audience?
Yeah, well, the audience was very specifically for product teams, in particular, the product managers, the product designers, and the tech leads, lead devs.
Mm,
Those were the three it was really for. Now, it's also true that I believe, and I still believe this is the case, that there's many good resources for lead devs. There's many good resources for designers, but there really wasn't much for product managers. And in fact, you talk to a typical lead dev and they'll typically complain about their product managers because that's the weak link. That's the weak link in the chain. And so I spent most of my focus, and I still do have to spend most of my time trying to raise the game of the product managers to be comparable to the designers and engineers, because they really need to be, three critical legs of the stool. And
yeah.
so you go
Oh,
ahead,
sorry.
go ahead.
No, I was just really curious when you say like product managers were like the weak link. I'm just curious to follow up, like how did that happen? What made that be so?
Oh, that's a super complicated question because there's so many dynamics going on here. First of all,
Mm,
it's pretty clear to people what the purpose of engineers is, to build our products. It's pretty clear to people what the purpose of designers are,
right.
even though there is a nuance there about interaction design, service design, visual design. But overall, people know a sense of what design is. But there's a lot less clarity about the purpose of a product manager. In fact, in a lot of companies, it's just a glorified name for a project manager. And but in a good product company, product managers have a very explicit responsibility. And this is one of those things that's very different if we talk about a team at Apple or Amazon or Google or Slack or Spotify, if we talk about a team there versus we talk about a team at, your favorite large bank, for example. And so the product manager job is fundamentally different. I would argue so is the designer and engineering job, but not to the extent that it's different in product management. And so is an industry, it's pretty much a mess on the
Mm,
product management side.
Yeah, thank you. I was so curious. I just wanted to hear your perspective on that. Wasn't surprising insight, but like great to hear your perspective. So, what was the impetus for writing Empowered? How did Empowered come to be?
Yeah, well, empowered was not really a planned child kind of thing. What happened was inspired spread much further than that we expected or had. Honestly, I didn't know the industry was quite that big. But as companies like Amazon became so financially successful, it kind of spread. Everybody wanted to kind of be like Amazon. So in truth, the book kind of rode that wave. But what happened was so many teams, and I don't want to make this sound like Silicon Valley was doing this great and the rest of the world was terrible, because the truth is, even in San Francisco, there are teams that are terrible. I meet them all the time. And on the other hand, I meet teams in China and Brazil and in Europe that are excellent. So it's really not about location. But what we found was that very often teams would read Inspired and go like, yes, this is what we know we need to do. But then they would tell me they weren't allowed to work that way. And of course, this is crazy to me, crazy talk. Like, why would you not want to work like the most successful companies in the world? And of course, the teams wanted to work that way, but the issue was their leaders. And I realized that while Inspired was sharing the techniques that the teams use,
Hmm.
how we needed to share the techniques that the leaders use, and that the leaders of companies like Google and Netflix and Airbnb were really using very different practices than the leaders in those other companies. And so that was really the impetus for Empowered, was to share the techniques of leaders that need to put in place the environment that the teams need in order to do good work.
Yeah, it's true, right? Because they don't just work in a vacuum. There's a context, and the leaders have so much, I'll just say, like, power around decision making and how things run, and so there's like that two sides of that,
Yes, exactly.
environment. By the way, I want to mention, everybody, put your questions in, and Marty will answer them. They'll filter us to them. So if you have questions, feel free to send them over, and we'll make sure to answer them. This is an interactive conversation. So, okay, so back to my questions about empowered. One of the things that struck me about the book is you talk about an empowered team versus like feature teams, and I'm curious, can you define for us the difference between those two teams,
Sure.
types of
Well,
teams?
yeah, and those labels are I put those labels on them. What I'm trying to say is, when I talk about an empowered product team, I'm just talking about a typical product team at a strong product company. So one of the company's names I've been rattling off there, and product. But on the other hand, in so many companies I meet, they don't work that way. Now, from 100,000-foot level, they actually look pretty similar. Both product teams and feature teams have somebody with a title product manager, usually. Sometimes they're called product owner, which is really just the role on the Agile team. They have some kind of product designer, and they have some number of engineers. It's usually between about 2 and 10 engineers. And of course, one of those engineers might be a lead dev, but the idea is that there's a set of engineers. Now, that's about where the similarities stop, though. In a real product team in a good product company, their mission, their purpose is actually to solve problems for customers and our business in ways that the customers love but work for our business. On the other hand, in a feature team, that's not their purpose. Their purpose is to serve the business. You will literally hear that phrase all over. They are there to serve the business, which to them is a bunch of stakeholders. And in fact, a lot of times they're even told the stakeholders are the business, are their customers. They say, like, that is your customer. And of course, that is not our customer. That is a partner for sure, but that is not. But anyway, so the purpose. Now, that shows in several big ways. First of all, on a feature team, the stakeholders pretty much one way or another get together and come up with a roadmap of features and projects to build. And it's worth pointing out that is output, not outcome. That is a bunch of stuff we're supposed to ship. And of course, good product companies have learned a long, long time ago that most of that output doesn't actually solve anything. We know from the analytics that most features are a big waste of time and money. So on the other hand, in an empowered product team, they're not given a roadmap of features to build. They're given a set of problems to solve. And so and that's a fundamental difference. In other words, the team is then empowered. This is what it means to be empowered. They are told, you figure out the best way to solve this problem. You're working with the technology every day. You're talking to customers every week. You figure out the solution. And then furthermore, if the features you build don't actually work, you're still on the hook to figure out a solution that does. So that's why an empowered product team is actually accountable to results, as opposed to a feature team is just the mercenaries there to implement a bunch of features that they generally didn't even decide is worth building. So fundamentally, it's different. It's worth pointing out, especially to people who care about engineering, that on a feature team, the engineers are just mercenaries. They're there basically to build what somebody else tells them. In fact, in a lot of companies, and this really drives me nuts, but in a lot of bad companies, not only are they mercenaries in figure, but they're literally mercenaries. They are an agency. The company has outsourced their engineering to some firm, whether it's in India or anywhere, it doesn't matter. The point is, they are literally mercenaries. There is almost no way to get innovation in that model, because one of the fundamental concepts in good product companies is that most of the innovation will actually come from your engineers. So if they are just there coding what some stakeholders tell them to build, innovation almost never happens. They're not even invited to the party. So in a real product team, like they would never at those companies outsource those engineers, because this is the most important thing. So that those engineers are right there. So an empowered engineer is, I would argue, the single most important thing that a company can do if they want to have continuous innovation. And that just doesn't happen if they're outsourced, number one. But even if they're not outsourced, they're employees, it doesn't happen if they're just told what to build. So I've always argued, if you're just using your engineers to code, you're only getting about half their value.
Wow, that's a pretty, I mean, that's a half the value. That's a pretty big, if I were a leader, I'd be like, wow, I'm only getting half the value out of this, group of people who I'm really investing heavily in.
Yeah, it's usually your most expensive line item too. So it's incredible waste, I see. After visiting one large company, at one point, I wrote an article called Epic Waste. You just don't find that amount of waste except in these big companies that have no idea about engineering. And the real ironic part is, in those companies, they view their engineers, if you talk about a big feature team company, their view of engineers is it's a cost. It's a necessary cost. It's an expense. On the other hand, if you go to a good product company, these are not expenses. These are your core enablers for your business. It really gets to the fundamental way the executives in the company view the role of engineering. Do they view it as IT there to basically serve a business, or do they view it as the core enabler of the business? I just described the difference between Boeing and Tesla. I just described the difference between Bank of whatever and Stripe. This is what we're talking about.
Yeah, I mean, those are pretty big differences. And I can absolutely see, like, because leadership makes those big decisions. And if they have a view that it's a line item, that's quite a different decision they're going to make, right? Than if they view it as this core resource that they can to enable themselves and the company. So what are maybe mindset, and it's a big question, so but what can a leader do to create more of an empowered product team? How do they begin to move towards that if they realize, this is more of a feature team at this point?
Right. Well, of course, my guess is that everybody on this call has heard, probably even works at a company that has some sort of digital transformation underway. Now, most of those companies don't realize it, but what they really are trying to do is this. What they need to do is this. What they're really saying is, we're under threat. We're worried that Amazon's going to come after us, and we can't compete against Amazon. Amazon has muscles that we don't have. So they know that, but they don't know what to do. They usually hire some consultant, some consultancy that tells them, oh, well, you need Agile, which of course is ridiculous. Agile is a little piece of the bigger picture. It's a small piece of the big picture. They need much more fundamental changes than that, which of course is why most digital transformations go nowhere fast. But what they really need to do is what we're talking about. They need to transform from feature teams to real product teams. Now, and I realize I didn't say this, and I always hesitate to say this because it's sort of a rat hole, but there are a lot of companies in the world that do software that are neither product nor feature teams. They're worse. And unfortunately, they're growing in number. There's basically just there's a set of processes out there. The main one is SAFe. You may have heard of it. Stands for Scaled Agile Framework, but it's actually nothing to do with Agile. It's just marketing BS. But that is, in that world, you can't do really any of what we're talking about. And I can't point to a single real product company with any level of success that is using those kinds of processes. And if they did, I am pretty convinced their good engineers would quit. So I want to just make sure I'm painting the landscape. That is very rare in a tech product company. It's more for the insurance companies and the banks that feel like that, they're not worried about the need for innovation.
Got it. But that is good to have that round out that picture.
Yeah.
To have that as well. I have a question I want to take from the audience. It's potentially a big shift in mindset to go from, for example, quarterly planning and feature-based roadmaps to truly empowered teams. What are the steps you can take to make the transition a better process, to a better process?
Yeah, well, this is very similar to your question, because both of them are essentially saying, how do we transform? And there, I don't want to, transformation is hard. The prerequisite in our experience is the CEO needs to be on board. If the CEO is not on board, the level of changes that are needed. In fact, this question gets right to the heart of it. It wouldn't be so hard to transform if it was just engineering, design, and product, but transformation impacts, to move to one kind of company to the other, impacts finance, which is what this question was just getting at. It impacts HR. It impacts sales and marketing, everything. And so without the CEO providing this understanding and the necessary air cover, it's unlikely to happen. Now, it's not, the irony is moving from quarterly planning, business cases, funding models like that to what a good company does. Ironically, it's easier in the sense that those companies were just making guesses on these features that would make some amount of money. All they have to do, and many of them have, is look back over the last quarter, last year, and see how good their predictions have been. And I've never seen a company say it was even better, as good as 50%. Most of them say like maybe 20, 30% of what we do actually gets a return. So, and now we're talking about what good companies do, which is actually holding teams responsible to outcomes, which you would think is what the company wants. So it's not really that hard. It just takes the leaders to understand. Now, the truth is this would be a non-issue if more of our leaders had actually worked at a place where they had seen what good looks like, but most haven't. So if you've never seen an alternative and all you know is the old CIO IT model, then that's what you do.
Yeah, you do what you know, what you've seen, what you've experienced. Yeah, there's a real draw to that, right? As human nature, we're drawn to what we know, what we've seen, what we've experienced.
Yeah.
In some way, there's a safety in it, I would say.
Yeah, there's a survivor bias. They figure like they're a VP now. They must know something.
It's so true. It's true. I want to ask another follow-up question from the audience. What about features that are presented by execs as this is part of the high-level product strategy, or this is a strategic decision we need to deliver in order to deliver the quality of product we will be happy with as a company and will differentiate us from the competition? And then they put in parentheses, without any market research of evidence of the latter.
Yeah. I mean, what this question is really getting at is that there's essentially two models of management out there in the world. That is describing what's referred to as command and control style management. It's been around since the Industrial Revolution. And to be honest, there are kinds of businesses like manufacturing where that probably makes sense. But if your business is innovation, this is really a problem. Now, first of all, let's even assume, hypothetically, let's say that in this case, the executive is right. This is still not a good way to work, because you will get a much better solution if the team feels empowered that it's their solution and they understand why. But of course, if they're wrong, which is, just like all of us, we're wrong a lot, then it's really a big problem, because the team is still going to go forward and get that. And again, just sort of say, okay, I'll build whatever you tell me to build. You just pay me every month and I'll continue to build whatever garbage you think you need. So that is Yeah, you know, Netflix is another one of my favorite companies, and they're pretty extreme on this spectrum of empowerment. Like they set the dial to 10 on empowerment, but they've got a mantra which I love, which is we lead with context, not control. And the idea is control is what was just described in that question. I'm going to tell you what to do. They're like, no, that is never how we get consistently good solutions. We want to instead provide the business context to the team. What's the context? What's our product vision? What's our product strategy? What's our target market, for example? What are the outcomes we need? And then let the teams figure out the best way to do that. That is what they mean by lead with context, not control. It's a fundamental mantra. It's been so fun for me to watch Netflix apply that not just to tech, which is what I grew up watching them to do in most of their life, but now they apply it to even creating content. And they've been unbelievably good at it. And by the way, so is Amazon. Same philosophy. So it's great to see it apply. I mean, we could have known, because if you followed Pixar, they did the same thing, and then they applied it at Disney when they became part of Disney. So we knew it was possible, but it's great to see that model of empowerment really work in other areas besides pure tech.
Well, I think this speaks directly to, the two books, right? Like Inspired is one piece, but Empowered and the leadership is if they don't empower the teams, it doesn't matter what the team can do, because if the leadership is command and control, telling them, like, it's not a two-way street. It's a dictate. Yeah, I think that's a great question. I want to take another one from the audience. You all have fantastic questions. So your book is targeted towards tech products. I'd say more software than hardware. However, some teams have an integrated hardware and software solution where one depends on the other, but the products are developed separately and brought together only at the end of development. Do you have any experience or recommendations to better improve collaboration and communication in these situations?
Yeah, well, so a few things I should probably make clear. One is my whole world, not just the books, are about tech-powered products. So, you could point to a company like Amazon and say they do some true tech products, like AWS is their product there is technology. But mostly, if you look at an Alexa device, if you look at Amazon.com, those are not tech products. Those are tech-powered products. And so my world is tech-powered products, which includes technology products, but that's really a tiny, tiny subset. It's all technology-powered products. I've never actually worked with any company doing something like a new brand of soap or whatever that is a consumer packaged good kind of product. Mm-hmm. I'm told that some of these techniques work there, but I don't know firsthand, so who knows? In the world of tech-powered products, though, a lot of them are hardware, software, firmware, devices, systems. I mean, you don't have to look further than an iPhone is an example of that. Same with a Garmin device. These are hardware, software, firmware, apps. There's a whole ecosystem there. That is normal. Now, it is true that there are dynamics involved whenever you get to hardware. Mostly from a product point of view, the difference is the risks are higher, because the risks of screwing up with hardware are much more consequential than the risks of screwing up with software. As many people know, it's one of the things I love about software. We could just fix it tomorrow if we really need to. If there's a device, not so much. We could
supply chains. Yeah, exactly.
This is bad. So so that really means those companies have to do more of what we advocate in terms of things like discovery. You have to, which is why of all the companies I've ever seen, Apple does more prototypes than any company I've seen, because they have to, because they're mostly doing these, multi-billion-dollar device products. So that are like the person said. There are definitely complexities when you have a whole stack that's an integrated stack that has to really, but even in pure software products, a lot of products are that. You want to talk about an online banking, they have all these different levels, platform services, at many different levels within platform. And then of course they have web services, they have applications, they have native apps. So we still have these issues. So the real result is that it is normal to have dependencies, and that is definitely a headache, but we deal with them. And this is a big part of what leadership does.
Mhm. Oh, that's so good. Okay, I'm going to follow up with another audience question. You all are having great questions, so we're going to continue on with yours. This question, they're using the word PM. I assume they're meaning product manager. Not all PMs will succeed in an empowered model. It's a lot of responsibility to solve open-ended problems compared to simply executing on a roadmap set by executives. How do you hire/interview PMs that will succeed in that model? And then there's a follow-up question, which I love, because this is a question I want to know too, is what's required from executives to help them succeed, and how do you judge success? So there's a lot there.
Yeah, but that's a great question.
Yeah.
And first of all, I would say that the person's right. It is a hard job. It is a hard job. Now, I don't want to make it sound like it's a unicorn, though. It's not. Just like, by the way, a lot of these companies will tell you they also have a hard time getting really good lead devs. Everybody wants, as soon as you find one, you hire them, and then you try very hard to keep them. Same thing. Now, the difference is, and I grew, the first 10 years of my career was as an engineer, and I went through, at the time, what was probably our best industry program for developing engineers and engineering management. It was called the HP Way. It was a whole engineering management program. I loved it. But it's true that for the first 10 years of my career, which were at HP Labs, every single day I had at least one manager there to help me get better at my job. Sometimes I had more than one because I was trying to learn other skills. And most people today don't have that. And this is sort of a roundabout way of answering this question. The answer is coaching. And this is one of the common threads across the great product companies, is they know these people are not born. You're not like born a great product manager, just like you're not born a great designer or a great engineer. You might be a talented, implementation engineer, but not an engineer that really understands how to invent and innovate. So coaching is really the key. And that is what we ask for from our managers. So the manager's first and foremost responsibility, Bill Campbell, who was known as the coach of Silicon Valley, who, by the way, literally coached Steve Jobs, Larry and Sergey in the first decade of Google, and Jeff Bezos. He literally coached them. His argument was that you cannot be a good manager without being a good coach. And so the first responsibility of every people manager is to develop the skills of their people. And so if you're a product manager, well, I was, when I wanted to learn product management, I was actually an engineering lead at the time. And I was like a lot of engineering leads, frustrated with product, and I wanted to learn it. So I did not know it, but my manager arranged for somebody who had a great track record of product to coach me. And so for a while there, for over a year, I actually had two people coaching me on different skill sets. And that's how you learn. It's not that hard to learn, actually, I believe. It's really not that hard if you have somebody who's been there, done that, and can show you the ropes.
Yeah, and it speaks back, I think, to that whole idea of like the role of the leader, not as like a dictator or a teller, but a coach and a partner.
That's right. Lead with context, not control. That's exactly right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, obviously, as a coach, I'm excited to see the idea of coaching and the role and that shift, because managing, leading, directing aren't the same as coaching. So I'm personally very excited to hear more people talk about this, that as a way to create more empowered companies and teams. Okay, I'm going to take another great question from the audience. Our company is moving from an approved roadmap strategy model to an OKR model. Do you have any practical advice that could aid this mental model shift?
Yes, but you probably won't like the answer. Let's see. Uh, I mean, many companies have moved to OKR, and most of them have got nothing out of it.
Mm.
Now, the reason is because the OKR model only makes sense if you've already moved to empowered product teams. If you still have feature teams, which you almost certainly do if you're coming from a roadmap model, if you still have feature teams, you can't just layer on OKRs and get any value. It's a mismatch. It's a cultural mismatch. This is why so many companies, they try for a year or two on OKRs and they say all it is a joke. We do this exercise every quarter. Everybody ignores it. It's theater. So what's really going on is OKRs came out of the model I'm describing. They came out of literally Andy Grove at Intel, which was sort of the father of a lot of these companies that we're talking about, and went from there to Google, and it went on. And so, but it only makes sense to use the OKR model because fundamentally it's an outcome model. It says, here's the problem to solve, that's the objective, and here's the outcome. Those are the key results. If you give a team that, but they're still a feature team, they just say, like, what do you want me to do? You want me to implement your features, or do you want me to do this outcome? And they always say, well, we're dependent on these features. So only do that is my suggestion to the questioner. Only do that if you move to the empowered team model. And then I do recommend the OKR technique. Now, there's a lot of common mistakes because it's been so abused over the last several years. So make sure you know what you're doing there. This is a big topic in the new book, Empowered. And one of the people that I think one of the best thinkers on real OKRs for real product teams is a guy named Felipe Castro. And he helped actually considerably on the book. I really wanted to make sure that the things I were advocating is the things he has also seen work. So anyway, that's an important topic, but it's not a small question.
Yeah, it's a big one. I just wondered, can you give us, like you said, there's some common mistakes. Can you give us one or two of the most common mistakes when people are,
Well, the first most common mistake is they still do roadmaps and they try to do OKR. So that's the first. The second most common mistake I see is what's called cascading objectives. What they do is they give the engineering leader a set of OKRs. They give the product leader a set of OKRs, the design leader a set of OKRs. And what do you think they do? They all go and pass those objectives down to their people. So then you have a cross-functional product team that is supposed to solve hard problems for the customer, right, in ways that work for the business. But instead, they all sit down and say, well, my manager says I'm supposed to work on tech debt. My manager says I'm supposed to redesign this. My manager says I'm supposed to, work on this customer problem. And everybody's like, well, then why are we even a team? So this cascading objectives is absolutely not what you do. That is what you can do fine if you're not in a tech product organization, if you're marketing or if you're sales, but not in tech product. So that's probably the second most common mistake. And then the third most common mistake is that they know it's supposed to be about outcomes, but they have no idea how to do outcomes. And they also realize that's hard. So what they do is they just put activities in there. They say, oh, our objective is to, improve our conversion rate. What's our key result? Ship these 5 features, which is the same as a roadmap.
Right. Yeah, I think it's hard too. It's like there's a really big paradigm mindset shift that the entire team culture leaders has to make.
Yeah, this is the transformation we're talking about.
Right,
yes.
Right. The hard stuff. Transformation is hard. It takes effort. I wouldn't say hard again. I don't want to say it can't be done. It just takes effort and concerted effort, to get there.
There are a lot, actually. I don't want to scare people off. I know a lot of your organization is based in the UK, and one of my favorite companies that is one of the best in the world today, is based in London. They did a major transformation over the last few years. They're called Trainline. And Trainline sells tickets to trains, but they were very old school. They were doing everything in the old IT way. And they came in, they totally turned that around. And last year it was the UK's most successful IPO. So it is absolutely a doable thing. But it takes, what did they do? Trainline. They brought in a CEO that knew what she was doing. That CEO brought in a head of technology and a head of product that knew what they were doing. And then they coached the people on how to work this way. Yep. And the rest was history.
Well, it goes back to your point, like the CEO really has to be on board with and lead, in my opinion, my own words, is like they have to lead it, not only just be on board, but they have to enable it and lead it given the role they serve.
Yes.
Okay, couple more audience questions. When looking for new jobs, what are some good signs that a company has a good coaching environment?
Yeah, that's always a good question for sure. And I would encourage you, if you're at a current company, don't feel hopeless right away. It's worth trying to get your current company to change. But if you do decide you're ready to go somewhere else, then what do you look for? So looking for it, honestly, the company itself is a lot less important than who you will work for. And I strongly recommend use LinkedIn, do your homework, find out where the hiring manager used to work, see if they've worked at a company that is good. There's quite a few of them around the world, for sure. And a lot of them have grown because they're good. And those people go off and do other companies. So finding a leader that has been there, done that, worked at a good product company. Then when you interview, make sure, I'll tell you explicitly what I recommend saying. Obviously, your first order of business in an interview is to convince them that they should want to hire you. But once you feel like you've made good progress there and they're clearly in sell mode, I would say literally, look, I want to join here because of you. I want to work for you. I've heard, I've done my research. I feel like you can help me become awesome. And I am willing to work incredibly hard and do everything you need me to do if you're willing to invest in me and help me become great. Now, Chris, most leaders and managers, that's what they love to hear. Some of them will tell you, I appreciate that, but I literally have no time for that. I need somebody who already knows this stuff. That's fine. At least you've learned that now. But most of them were like, okay, that's the deal. And that's what we're looking for.
Yeah, that tracks with the folks that I work with too. They really want to grow the team and grow people. And that's actually a massive part of their mission. On top of having to meet business goals, they really want, and product goals, they really want to grow their people. And those are great suggestions. Okay, we got a couple more. The great questions keep coming. Marty, if you have a little bit more time here. How important are academic qualifications like an MBA in a role as a product manager? And would you say there's any ceiling to your potential success without it?
This is one of those answers that kind of depends on where in the world you are. It's kind of no secret that in Silicon Valley, it's probably more of a hindrance than a help. Now, and I always tease my friends who feel very strongly anti-MBA. I'm like, come on. We all know there are some very good people with MBAs that have done very well. But their argument is the first thing they have to do with somebody that comes with an MBA out of a top program is break all the bad habits. Because what they've learned is really not what we care about. But in my experience, getting into a top program is a good sign that this person is probably pretty sharp and has some real potential. But in most of the world, it doesn't have that negative connotation. And it is true. So the general answer is I don't recommend an MBA. There are way better things you could do. And it's really not necessary. But in some parts of the world, an MBA is still required to kind of make it to a certain level, that referencing the ceiling. Is not the case in Silicon Valley, but it can be the case in parts of the world which are more, clubby that way. So, and full disclosure, I don't have an MBA, so obviously I'm biased. But I do think it is critical, not, the degree itself. In fact, a lot of great people today have no degree. They literally just went
Yep.
straight in, they learned how to program themselves, and they're fabulous.
Yep.
So I'm much more about the person than I am about the credentials. Because fundamentally, no matter how good your degree is from wherever, it's all going to be new stuff in the next few years. It always is. So it's really about how fast does the person learn? Can they assimilate what they've learned? Can they apply what they've learned? This is really what we're interviewing for. So
yeah, that's great. Yeah, thank you. Sorry to cut you off. I've got two last questions I would love to ask. If you can just give us a couple more minutes. These ones are a little bit more like team oriented and company oriented. Any suggestions for teams changing from roadmap to OKRs related to in-flight projects? Should the team try to relate the current project to an OKR, or wrap these projects up and start the new model with a clean slate? This is a little bit again around transformation and how they go about making those changes.
Yeah, I mean, normally it would be done on a quarterly thing. So I wouldn't interrupt your quarter. Do whatever you're doing. If you've got a project you're underway, if that's a multi-year project, then that's a big red flag to begin with, right? And so the sooner you kind of get modern practices, the better. Because of course, big bang is never good. Just never good. That's a whole other delivery related discussion. So breaking that up, but I would do it at a quarterly thing. I wouldn't stop things right now unless everybody agrees you're on a terrible path.
Got it. Thank you so much. Okay, last quick question here. How do OKRs and roadmaps work together? It seems like you need both to be empowered to have effective planning.
No, and yeah, this can be actually a pretty complex topic. The thing is, if
it's
you're
not quick, sorry.
if you're given a roadmap and objectives, that's a problem, because roadmaps are generally output, objectives are outcome. Which one is it? So now and you don't need roadmaps at all, to be clear. You do not. That's something I understand why companies like roadmaps, but we have better ways of doing it. However, a roadmap itself is not the problem. So if, for example, you give teams objectives, and then they get to work on solving those problems, and then they realize we're going to launch this new feature in 3 weeks, there is no problem with sharing that on a roadmap of scheduled launch activity. In fact, you kind of need to plan, right? Product marketing needs to be involved. Sales may need to be involved. Service, this is normal. Where you get into trouble is if you commit to features on a roadmap before the team is able to discover a solution that works, because now you're hamstrung. Yep. And so roadmaps cause tremendous damage because they're done too early without any evidence. And that's why it is a dangerous word, because the rest of the company sees something on a roadmap, they think it's a commitment. So you have to be super careful that way. But all these questions about roadmaps and objectives and this transformation, luckily that is the topic, that is the subject of the new book. And I'm not trying to sell the books, but these are not minor topics. It took more than 400 pages to go through this stuff. These are major topics, and they're not unrelated topics. So coaching relates to staffing, relates to vision, relates to strategy, relates to a really important topic called team topology. How do we structure our product teams? There's a lot of related topics here that leaders really need to understand.
Yeah, I'm excited. I think this has been a great discussion to get people excited about the book and to read more. You're absolutely right. There's so many great topics. Thank you so much for joining us in this session. It was so great to have you here, Marty, and to have you for extra time. We usually go a little bit shorter. So thank you so much. Our next session will be on February 2nd, where we'll be talking to Liz Wiseman about multipliers, which, this is just my own personal note, it's a great book that I recommend to all of my leaders. So I'm really looking forward to that conversation as well. Thanks again for being here, everybody. Have a great day.